Roman Catholic nuns, the brides of Christ, are seen universally as women who care for the weak and vulnerable. But more than 200 people claim they were mentally or physically abused in homes that were meant to care for them. The sisters say the claims are false. The victims say it's the church's time for penance. It could be any group of people going up on stage for a school reunion photograph, but it's not. And they didn't meet at any ordinary school. They met in 4 orphanages in Scotland run by the Poor Sisters of Nazareth, in Lasswade near Edinburgh, Glasgow, Kilmarnock and Aberdeen. Many of them haven't seen each other for 20, 30, even 40 years. Every one of these people says they suffered violent, abusive childhoods at the hands of Roman Catholic nuns into whose care they've been entrusted. But these are just some of the men and women who are fighting for compensation and an apology from the Catholic Church. Legal teams acting for them were astonished at the number of people who came forward with exactly the same stories of abuse from different homes, stretching back over half a century.
You were in Aberdeen?
Nazareth House,
Aberdeen. And
when the allegations emerged about Nazareth House in Aberdeen last summer, the sisters themselves said nothing. But since a deluge of people have come forward making the same claims about other homes run by the sisters, their lawyers have denied all the allegations and the Bishop of Aberdeen has gone on the offensive.
There are some people who are clearly have got bad memories. Some people whose lives are not as happy as they ought to be, are looking for reasons why, and they're looking into their past. There are some people before whom lawyers have been dangling a pot of gold. There are a whole range of possible motives, some of which are perhaps more understandable and more acceptable, and others more reprehensible. I am simply saying that some people have been making fantastical accusations against the sisters.
The Catholic order looked after children in Nazareth houses from the early 1870s. Some were orphans, some had parents who were unable to look after them, but others were placed there by the children's panel for being uncontrollable or for petty crime. Thousands of children have been cared for by the Poor Sisters of Nazareth over the past century. Not all have happy memories. 263 have begun legal action. So are they fantasising, or did it happen? Frontline's spoken to just over 100 former residents who are all suing the sisters. We interviewed some of them before the extraordinary reunion we organised in Glasgow.
It was a constant beatings. They crucified us. They simply crucified us. When I saw that film recently of Schindler's List, all during the film, we had no Schindler. During the night, when they would be dressed completely in white, checking us to see if our arms were in the shape of a cross. If they weren't, you woke up to a thrashing. Bearing in mind our age then, and these tall ladies to me were dressed in nothing but white, and these straps in their hand. The nuns to us were next to God. And we would think they were right, and it was us that were wrong. I would think it was. I used to pray to God, why is the devil in me? I'm always wrong.
That was 60 years ago, but other allegations of cruelty have been made by people who were in the homes right up until the late 1970s. This film was made in Kilmarnock in 1952. The children look well fed and well dressed, But do the pictures tell the real story? This is how one woman remembers being treated in the 60s as a 10-year-old because she was prone to fits.
Because they used to think that a lot of times I was doing it for attention and I was putting it on, I used to get punch-ins, and they would take me and take my clothes off, take all my clothes off, and I'd get battered and shoved in a cold bath. Other kids were made to make fun of me and made to ridicule me because of my disability. And this made things even harder for me. I still suffer from depression to this day. And several times I've tried to commit suicide.
Just emotional. Well, I know, Hen, I know how it feels. I was like that. 38 years ago. I know. Where do you stay now? Where do you stay now? I know, Hen, I know I was like that.
The sister in charge came over, had a look at the floor and told me it wasn't done right. So she gave me a cloth and told me to go on my knees and polish it further to get a shine up, which I did. And as I went down on my knees, she put her boot into my back a couple of times. My legs spread, my arms spread, and I just looked up at her and she told me to get it done properly.
I'm sure I did. It was you. Hiya, Hen. I remember.
The doctor examined me and he said that I'd been kicked, and this was the toe of a boot or a shoe that had went into my skin, and in his opinion it was bad bruising.
For a second, this is Veronica. Veronica. That's Veronica. Oh, you.
I've watched other children getting abused. I've watched nuns hitting and slapping and punching and trailing arms near out their sockets. So, I mean, 200 or 300 kids can't all be wrong.
Children shared dormitories depending on what age they were. The under-5s were in a separate nursery, but former residency punishments meted out were the same everywhere. Everyone says bedwetting was seen as a cardinal sin by the nuns, who checked children's beds during the night. The guilty would be punished, sometimes beaten, forced to stand outside the nun's cell with a urine-soaked sheet over their heads, or thrown into a cold bath.
My younger sister, she'd waken me up and say, I've wet the bed, I've wet the bed, I've wet the bed. And I thought, oh no. So I either kind of just jump into her bed and put her pyjamas on and pretend it was me that had done it, or constantly swapping sheets or whatever she'd done, or if it was just on her pyjamas, or if it's on the sheet, and we would turn around. And then I would just take the cold baths that came with it. It was just, I was too scared to argue about, you know, the child, so you don't.
And this was sadistic treatment. This wasn't just a case of going to a home and the nuns were strict and you did as you're told. The cruelty that went on there, mentally and physically.
Because it was the big families, weren't they? You big wiggers were always in it, weren't you? You were always genius. I was always in trouble, wasn't
I? It was the same nun every time. She'd be standing in the middle of the corridor, so you had to pass her. Yeah. There was no thing. The nuns used to carry what's called drying sticks. Right. They were little sticks about that long, and they would actually wear drying sticks because we used to have the little cupboards, didn't we? And used to hang this racks. Used to have them in the pockets, normally the right pockets, or up the sleeves. She was like a gun, wasn't it? She used to stand there in the middle. Do you remember, Peter? She used to stand in the middle, and you'd be walking along the corridor. You were walking too fast, or you were walking too slow. There was something, and as you're walking past, you went, "Hurry up, boy!" Slap.
They came in to the dormitory and they smelt it, you know, pee, and I could hear them. I was only a wee girl, but I could hear them going down checking everybody's clothes and everything, and they found my pants under my clothes, and that nun dragged me out of that bed, and she made me kneel in front of her cell. It was just a wee room partitioned off, and she made me kneel in front of that cell, and then she would say to you, get up and wash those pants, get back to your bed. And of course, when you got up in the morning, the pants weren't dry, so you had to put them on. It was shocking.
There was one occasion where I got my hand stuck in the radiator. I was just sitting talking and playing about like kids do, and the next thing I knew my hand was stuck. And one of the children ran off to tell, I think it was Sister Mary, and she came back and she said, "Oh, Riley, you've been messing about again." We were always called by our second names, never called by a Christian name. And she says, "Well, I'll teach you." And she turned the radiator on. And of course, the radiator got hot and my hand started to swell, and I was screaming and trying to pull my hand out.
For Christine's sister Grace, life was so awful she tried to jump out of a first-floor window.
I remember one particular day trying to drag her in a bathroom window. She was trying to commit suicide. It was an upstairs window. She was about 8 or 9 years old. I'm 11 months older than her. And there was myself and 2 other girls trying to drag her back in. She'd had enough. I remember Grace wetting the bed once, and she sat about her with the dining room chair leg, and she was beating her with it, and I dived on her back. And she got all the other kids in the group to sit on me while she beat Grace. And then she beat me after.
Are you all right? You all right?
Yeah. So that was just, there's no wonder she tried to jump out the window.
You never used to eat your dinner, you used to keep it in your mouth. Oh, you were dead stubborn. We were just talking about that.
Mealtimes for some of the children held no joy either. People we've spoken to say a lot of the food was poor, but refusing to eat it was another transgression, which the nuns dealt with harshly.
You would sit at the dining room table and you knew what was coming. You knew you couldn't force yourself to eat this food. A carer would pin you down at the back with your 2 arms each side of you, and the sister would pinch your nose so she couldn't breathe. You'd open your mouth and the food would get shoveled in. You were gagging the whole time it was getting put in. You were trying to swallow. She was agitated and angry around you. You knew it was coming. You couldn't force yourself, and you would vomit up the food she'd forced down. Of course, that would set her off worse. She was still trying to shovel this food in. The end result would be total chaos. The plate, the spoon, everything would go flying, and she'd batter you.
But you see, when we used to tell our father what was happening, he wouldn't believe it. He would say, "I didn't think they would do that."
I know, I'd go and tell my father.
So did it happen? The sisters deny the allegations, and the church is critical of the way the information for the civil case has been gathered. A Glasgow law firm sent out a questionnaire detailing acts of cruelty, asking clients to tick the relevant boxes. The church says many former residents have happy memories, which conflict with these allegations.
I said, I do. Who's that like?
I believe they believe it, if that sounds right. I mean, I think it's just discipline. Maybe they thought the discipline was turned into brutality, you know. I got worse than that at school with the belt. I remember the belt, and that was a lot worse than I'd ever get off any nun in my time there. If we had wet the bed, we would just get up and put the sheets in the washing basket and got a new sheet. I mean, most of the time we'd done that ourselves. But if we hadn't, then the staff just changed it and nothing was said, really.
Grampian police have conducted an investigation into the allegations made about the home in Aberdeen, and a report's been sent to the Crown Office. Lawyers acting for the victims say if the sisters don't settle out of court now, they'll put forward 6 test cases for compensation in the next few weeks. The courts will have to decide not just whether the allegations are true, but whether the punishments meted out were exceptionally harsh, even by the standards of institutional childcare at the time. Could the nuns have mistreated the children?
It's possible, yes, it's possible. We're human beings are. We're all flawed and fallible, and members of religious orders are no different. So it's possible. That it's probable, I'm not so sure, though some people clearly have a memory of having been treated badly, as they see it, in regard to bedwetting. It's a very sensitive area, and of course already one who wets the bed, I suppose, feels that their dignity has been in some way diminished. And nowadays I think the care we would have for children in those situations in all probability would be different from the care, or the discipline, or the way in which they were treated at that time.
Is part of what you're saying that children were treated a lot differently 50 years ago, so it may have been that they were chastised in a way that we wouldn't think was right in any way today?
It'd be very surprising if 120 children, or how many were there at the time, many of them whom were from poor homes, in the sense of broken homes, or children who nowadays or subsequently would have been approved school children, did not need some sort of disciplinary action. And in those days it was commonplace in the home and at school to chastise physically. I mean, I remember the stick at home, I remember the strap in school, and people of my age know that no matter how kind and loving parents and teachers were or expected to be, that was part of the way in which one was brought up. And one hopes that one has not been, in the main, flawed by that or resents that. But I would also want justice to be done for the sisters, and indeed the Catholic Church, by a careful, as it were, appraisal of what happened and evidence sought, and the whole of these allegations put in a context that helps us to understand that if they are true, or true in part, how it is that they occurred.
Allegations of ill treatment are not only made against the nuns running the homes. Former residents say other staff did the same, and even worse. We're aware of cases where people claim they were sexually abused by 4 men working for the nuns in Aberdeen and Lasswade in the 60s.
It used to make me play about with him and interfere with him and do things to him what a man would want little girls to do to them without actual intercourse taking place. How can a kid stand up and say, look, this person's doing this to me, please help me? Because nobody's going to believe them.
I happened on him one day in the changing room. I don't know whether it was planned on his part or not. It was the children's changing room. You had to go through it to get outside to the yard. And as I went through, he was sitting there and he was exposed, and I could see him in the mirror. As I walked through, the mirror was on him, and he got the eye contact. So he says, oh, you're looking at me, aren't you? Come over here. And he demanded that I come over and touch him. And there was other occasions where he would get me on my own and he would make me touch him and he would touch me.
It was kind of known in the children's home that he was a bit of a dodgy bloke. He was, and whenever I saw him, he'd smelt of drink and his nose was bright red, you know, and really heavy red face. I always remember that. But I remember hearing about girls and boys taken into a van, but not paying any attention to it. And he did that to me one day. He took me into the van and sexually interfered with me under my pants. But what can you do? You can't tell anybody.
So you didn't tell anybody?
Oh, no, no. No, they wouldn't have believed you for a million years.
I was a target. I suppose Peter was a target because we never ever got pocket money. We always got stopped for some reason.
Aye.
And this guy used to, obviously knew.
And he was dead kind.
That's right. He was a kind old janitor, and he used to give you sweets, and he'd ask if you got pocket money that week, and you know, you say no.
He knew I didn't, because he was greeting and everything. You know what I mean?
And so what he used to do was he used to
talk you in,
get you into the boxing shed, and then when that, you know, after that he would. It was routine. He'd start off, you know, he'd spank your bum, didn't he?
A penny a smack it was.
Yeah, yeah. But then after a while it would be something else. It would be like you touching, and then that'd be another little.
So that's you got another complex.
Yeah. I went to the nuns and told them that he slapped me, he played with me, made me play with him. I remember being told that I was telling wicked lies. After that, he got me on my own.
Well, there's none to take things to you, I know.
And you know, like, you know, you learn not to, you learn to deal with it.
You couldn't win.
You learn to hold it and allow it to happen.
30 years on, Jimmy McGuigan and hundreds of others are fighting back. Successful claims could cost the sisters millions of pounds. According to their own financial accounts, the poor sisters themselves are worth £154 million. Lawyers for both sides are preparing their cases. Across the other side of the world in Australia, the Poor Sisters have also faced allegations of cruelty, but there the approach has been very different. Former residents of Nazareth homes have been contacted to ask how they were treated, and a helpline's been set up. The church also runs a scheme to help victims of sexual abuse by members of religious orders. The Australian church acknowledges that physical abuse is a major issue and that the church has to be more open than it was in the past.
It was some of the inappropriate ways that church authorities responded to the complaints that added to the scandal and to the lack of credibility that developed from then on.
This is the one that was in, it's a 1955 group. I'm in that one, and this is Sister.
Yeah, so she was there when we were there, but she was much older then.
Bad memories.
So she couldn't do much.
She was the one that bashed everybody.
Who's this? Not Juliana?
No, no.
Here the nuns had the same obsession with bedwetters.
There was a little girl who was 5 who wet her pants in class, and anyway, Sister Imelda went up to her, dragged her out and put her down on the floor and made her lick up her urine, and got one of the other girls, gave her the stick and said if she brings her head up once, hit her. If I wet the bed, it'd be either one of the nuns or one of the older girls. They'd come in, they used to pull the sheets back, and then they'd rub our faces into it until our nose bled, or our whole face would be just red, you know, and stink her urine. And then we'd go and have breakfast, and we'd go to school, and then the nun would say, like, who wet the bed? Then you'd have to stand up on the desk, right, and then she'd call us all down to the front, and we'd have to stand in the hot water, and up to a lock probably about here, and we'd have to stand, it could be half an hour, 20 minutes to half an hour, till the water had cooled off a bit, you know, and like, it wasn't enough to make blisters. They were pretty clever, you know, but our legs used to burn, and we'd be dancing, you know, like this sort of thing. So, but the thing is, you couldn't get out of it. If you got out of it, she'd just go bang.
That's my school photo.
Mealtimes too were an ordeal.
I would have been about 12, 13.
Oh, yeah, because you were at St. Alicia's.
Yes.
So you'd have to be.
I remember having to eat meat that it wasn't cooked properly. It was like a stew, and it had sort of hair on it. And the nun stood over me because I refused to eat it and made me eat it. Of course, then when I vomited it, I was forced to eat it. I can't even stand to look at meat even today.
So
it has not changed.
Has not changed.
As long as that building's still there, those memories are still there.
The nun come through the door, and the girls, like an automatic reflex, their hands went up over their head in protection. Well, you know, I sort of glanced around wondering, you know, what is happening here, and so over the head went my hands. I was soon to learn that this particular nun would, you know, walk around, and a movement in the wrong direction, or a murmur here or a murmur there, bang, bang, and you soon learnt, you know, cover up.
In Australia, the Catholic bishops have appointed a priest who coordinates response to allegations of all kinds of abuse. It has a commission to investigate claims of sexual abuse and a fund to compensate victims. They offer counselling, but most importantly, they're prepared to hear the victims out.
What we've tried to do, particularly in the last few years, is listen more to the victims, and to do that in ways where we actually learn from them, and learn what they've gone through, not only what they've gone through, but what the church has done to them in abuses of power, and to see that there are structures within the church that need to be confronted around the abuse of power.
WYRE is an internationally recognised expert on abuse. He was called in by the Catholic Church in Australia to assist in responding to allegations of abuse there. They took his advice.
There was an apology by the Bishop of Melbourne publicly. Another bishop went publicly in the television to apologise, to be open. There are still problems because technically the church is in lots of organisations, and they need to get all those organisations to subscribe to the procedures that are being laid down. But they're moving forward.
We've learned very clearly that at the end of the day, that adopting a purely legal framework is not only damaging to victims, but also damaging to the church, because the general community and the church community is expecting us here in Australia to be authentic to the gospel of Jesus Christ that we preach, and the gospel of love and compassion to people, and to show that in this very important area of dealing with victims of abuse.
The most important thing the church needs to do is to be open, to recognise that abuse did go on, that we don't have to get into cover-up, that we don't have to run away from it, that we can listen and hear, and if I was going to use a biblical phrase, the truth can be used to set people free, and that includes the church.
In Scotland, after a sex scandal involving a trainee priest, the Catholic Church appointed 10 child protection advisors last year to talk to people who say they've been abused.
If anybody that was in either our direct care or the care of people who are church personnel are feeling that they weren't given the best kind of treatment, we must listen to them and, where it's appropriate, apologise that that's how they experienced what happened to them.
Unlike the church in Australia, her child protection advisors have no power to investigate or compensate, but can only refer people onto other bodies.
The big move in Scotland nowadays is to allow authorities to do that, that it's much more independent. And so with many of the allegations that have been made against any kind of church personnel, whatever the church happens to be, the big thing now is to say you can't really investigate this easily from within. And you also have to be very trained, and you've not to muck up legal process in doing it. So there are 2 agencies that do that kind of investigation, and that's the police and social work departments. And they should be the ones that are investigating any form of abuse.
All of which takes time, and so far time hasn't healed the bitterness of the children of Nazareth.
They've stolen our childhood. We're never going to get that back.
I just want justice at the end of the day for all my family, what they've gone through, and an apology is not good enough.
If they are quite religious and God-loving people, then to me their own guilt is their punishment. That's actually out in the open. To me, that is punishment enough.
Their duty of taking us in there was to look after us and care for us until we were reasonably able to do that for ourselves.